All right, let's now pick it up from where Mrimi Mwangi has left it off there on House of Cards. My guest in studio quickly on my immediate right, Peter Kaluma, Member of Parliament, Homa Bay Town. Thank you for joining us tonight, as well as Irungu Kangata, Senator for the County of Murang'a. Thank you, Senator Irungu, for coming in here for Checkpoint tonight. So the issues have already been put out by Mrimi in that piece, and something major that comes out of that particular piece, if we are to pick up from that, is that Parliament now is seen to be trying to stifle devolution. Let's start with you.
Akisa, we have one Parliament in Kenya. I think we should put it in context so that all Kenyans understand it. We have one Parliament with two houses of Parliament. This is the National Assembly and the Senate. Yeah, those two houses of Parliament, if you look at Article 93, Sub-Article 2, are said to be in charge of respective roles. They have defined roles under the Constitution. If you go to Article 95 of the Constitution, those roles of the National Assembly are specified. In Article 96 of the Constitution, the roles of the Senate are specified. I'm saying this to, take away the thinking that Parliament is divided, that Parliament is fighting within itself. There is no Parliament fighting the Senate. The Senate is part of Parliament. I personally doubted that the Senate was going to go to the court, because it is like Parliament suing itself. I don't even imagine that the Senate is a body corporate capable of suing or being sued in its own name, just like the National Assembly. My thinking is that we need to look at those provisions of the Constitution and think of the interest of Kenya. If you look at those, constitutional provisions, the Senate, secures the interest of the county. Even in the battle for revenue, they are doing the right thing. They look at the counties and how they can be facilitated to facilitate devolution. We are also from counties. We fight for our counties even when we divide revenue as the Constitution mandates us. The difference is that, unlike the senators, we look at the national resources, holistically. We share revenue between the levels of governments, the organs of governments, and the arms of governments. So that while the senators are entitled to say we need more for devolution, we at our level have to look at this competing interest between levels of government and all government agencies, and question how much we have in terms of those competing interests in terms of sharing. And that is the extent to which, when we looked at the formula coming from the Commission on Revenue Allocation, said, well, there is a proposal to give more, but where do we give money in terms of balance? And ultimately, doing our best to the devolved units, we decided 310 billion in our circumstances would be good. Remember, Akisa, we are in a situation where, because of the debts we took, and I've heard the senators saying there is need for involvement of Parliament as a unit in that matter. We are spending nearly our entire revenue collection, to service the debts, going forward. A huge amount of money. The Kibaki time, it was, quite low. You are thinking of a budget which is largely running on debts. In as much as we want our counties to have those monies they have, we can only do so much. I know some people have been, saying we have a problem giving counties money because there is too much corruption there. But we say no. There could be corruption there, but you will see a line in the budget for this year in which we have given, the senators money to undertake oversight, so that the accountability measures.
In essence, what you're saying is we can't afford what the Senate needs.
No, we can't afford, and I think we need to be honest with Kenyans. We can't afford, and at the level of, the National Assembly, we are done with division of revenue.
But the Senate disagrees with you as far as that is concerned.
It is already an act of Parliament, and that to me is what forms the point of departure. And I agree, if the interpretation of the senators of the constitutional provisions clash with ours, they can go for, its resolution before the courts.
Okay.
That is the extent to which I agree with them. I, however, disagree with the idea that they are going to the Supreme Court instead of the High Court, where constitutional interpretations, is undertaken. And I want to tell the nation that we have advised our Speaker that as National Assembly, we should not participate in that Supreme Court thing. We are not interested. We are done and dusted on division of revenue.
Irungu Kaluma says, and of course we've had a number of members of parliament speak in that same tongue, that they cannot afford the amount of money that the Senate is asking for. Note that the Senate is also following proposals from the Commission for Revenue Allocation. So where do we sit? Is the Senate being unreasonable, or do you really see that this is very needful for the counties?
Thank you, but personally I tend to differ with my colleague. His argument that indeed we cannot afford. For me, I strongly believe we can afford. I start with the issue concerning budgets. When you look at the national budget of the Republic of Kenya, it is true, vast majority of our money goes to repay debts. Particularly, remember, debts under our constitution, they are what we call a first charge. That is, before you pay out any other thing, you first start repaying the charge. It's also true, Kenya has what we call a deficit budget, meaning what we are planning to do supersedes our projected revenue, and therefore the gap is usually filled up with what we call external and internal borrowing. I also agree, when you look at the budget, about 700 billion Kenya shillings goes to pay public employees, who happens to be about 800,000 Kenyans, which I agree is also quite unfair, that we are using a lot of money, almost 55% of our national revenue, to pay about 800,000 government employees.
Most of who are ghosts.
Yes, to me, I think it's a problem. But the question should be asking, who do we blame for that? It is the National Assembly. Remember, when we enacted this constitution, we gave Parliament a sacrosanct duty, the National Assembly a sacrosanct duty, to become a budget-making organ. Unlike previously, where the National Assembly was just an organ to come and rubber stamp proposals from the Treasury, it is them who do the actual appropriation. So if at all we have a problem of debt in this country, blame the National Assembly. If you have a problem of a bloated public wage bill, blame the National Assembly. In particular, taking also into account, it is the National Assembly that meets and make a resolution to increase what we call the debt ceiling. It is them who approve that decision. So if at all we have reached a situation where you cannot manage national debt, and therefore you don't have enough money to devolve to the counties, blame National Assembly. It is failing Kenyans. It does not want to devolve money. Be that as it may, look also from the angle of how much money they are proposing going for this financial year they are going to raise. Last financial year, they projected about 1.5 trillion Kenya shillings. Currently, they are projecting about 1.9 Kenya shilling trillion. So meaning an increment of about 400 billion Kenya shillings. Now, you tell me, the government, the national government, is going to increase its revenues with about 400 billion. But when we tell them to only increase the amount they are devolving to the counties with only 17 billion shillings, they are refusing. Is that fair? Remember, key things that affect the common mwananchi at the grassroots have been devolved. Health has been devolved. Agriculture has been devolved. Water and sanitation has been devolved. Those are the core things that Kenyans want implemented. Remember, by them, most importantly, agriculture in the national government budget was allocated about 3% of the entire budget, notwithstanding agriculture being 70% core of what we call the gross domestic product, the GDP. So meaning, surely, the national government cannot assist farmers. We need to send more money to the farmers, and that can only happen if you devolve more funds to the grassroots.
Akisa, I agree with my brother, and I thank you for bringing him. It's very sober having been in both houses.
In both houses, yes.
The problem around, the division of revenue is about, the insufficient amount of resources, we have. The problem is bigger than, what Kenyans are looking at. Remember, the national government collects money through taxes. But we have also given county governments, our devolved units, some limited powers over, those local taxes in trading markets, the land rates. The problem we've had is that the collections have not been at optimum. You go to Kenya Revenue Authority, we are always below. You go to the county governments, the monies they are emitting from their collections down there are very low. And if you go down, Kangata will agree with me, they collect so much. And that is why, some of us have been proposing that why don't we involve a body like Kenya Revenue Authority to help our counties establish, systems for foolproof, money collections. Because what you'll hear is that these monies are just collected, pushed into drawers there, and people then are into fundraising or, developing their own selves. So we must start from the point that how do we make this cake bigger so that we can run those services which are important to the people. Number two, for the little that we are able to put together at the end of the year, you have a situation where the National Assembly, as my brother rightly says, has the budgeting function. This is not just exclusive to National Assembly. They also, budget among counties. I think that is, something constitutional. We can do nothing about it. But look at it. When we intervene as Parliament to deal with budget, they say sectors have bargained outside there. And so Parliament is, finding itself very confined. You want to move money, for instance, from transport to the justice law order sector. You can't. You are told you are sealed there. And that brings me to propose that maybe what we need to look at is the law around budget. So that when the Constitution says the budgeting function is in Parliament, the issue of controlling debts are within Parliament, really we act and we are able to do so. Otherwise, in the current legal context, it comes, and Kangata will confirm, you're already told you are moving within that amount of money. Right. But let us be realistic. We have foreign debts. We have limited resources. We wish, as senators do, that we have monies for the devolved units. Where we are lamenting is that after we have these limited collections and poor budget sharing, the accountability measures around money, and this is from the national government down to the devolved units, are not working. Ngata will come here and tell you, Akisa, that health is devolved. But go to your county, see what they have done with that money.
But they've also been
There is a way in which the performance by county governments have disheartened, the strongest supporters of devolution.
Honorable Kaluma, let me just take you back to the issue of debt. There have also been arguments that the big debts that we have were majorly for national government projects. So then why are we unfairly, hitting out other counties for projects? Why not put it on the national government share?
A difficult question, yet easy. You see, the national government is borrowing, as I understand it, because the revenue collections do not meet the set targets. And remember, this pool from which we are sharing resources between the national government and the counties is a pool from which even counties also need to collect local revenues and remit to. So there are also poor remittances from the counties. They want money, but those things they collect down there, they are not sending them to the national government. So the national government facing a deficit has now to go out. Where I would personally, fault the national government is where you are taking debts, having faced a deficit, to undertake largely devolved functions. And that is where the failure of the Senate for us in the National Assembly comes. If you look at health, for instance, you cannot take foreign debt to do health implementation locally. That is devolved largely. The national government has only national referral facilities and policy. Where is the Senate's departmental committee on health when you hear things like those containers being bought as if they are referral facilities? We expect the Senate to have departmental committees which go to secure devolution, so that when you are proposing a budget like they are proposing addition now, Akisa, they are not merely saying that we want this amount of money, but they are saying this amount of money went to this sector of agriculture, it should be devolved. This amount of money went to water should be devolved. If that argument were patterned that way, it would also help us, push the national government when they are doing bargains to root them.
All right,
But you see what senators have done.
Let's have him react to that. You're directly attacking the Senate.
No, I'm not attacking them. I'm saying instead of creating committees which would secure and which would identify the monies which are wrongly going to the national government, they are busy with committees which are national government functions. So that when you debate and seek money, you make Kenyans understand. If you said, why is the national government Ministry of Water having 100 billion when that function is devolved? Not a blanket thing of 17 billion, please which cannot help anything much.
For me, that criticism is unfounded. Reason being that he knows very well Senate does not deal with what we call money bills. We do not initiate money bills. Those are issues which are usually discussed and analyzed and critiqued at the National Assembly. So, for instance, it is the Budget Committee that is currently chaired by Mheshimiwa for Kikuyu, my friend Mr. Kimani Ichung'wah, to raise those issues and say, no, stop appropriating these funds because you are dealing with matters that fall under the counties. So it is not us. That's not our duty. It is them. Remember, this is one of the issues that we have taken to the court concerning some matters that appear to have been discussed in a manner that is not critical. So that's number one. Number two, we have continued, of course, to raise a red flag, to say the way the budget has been captured, we have seen an overreach by the national government intruding into the functions of the devolved units. In fact, that is one of the reasons why those members who represented Senate during the discussions on DORA, that is Division of Revenue Bill discussion, refused to budge because they were arguing, okay, you are saying there is no money, but how come we are seeing some budget lines allocating money on matters which ideally ought to have gone to the counties? On what reason? Take, for instance, you find the Ministry of Health. It has huge programs. Instead of taking that money and giving to the counties, they still want to retain some programs, which for me, they ought to have been to the counties. So you can see.
This is how you see we agree.
So the point is, allow me to finish.
Allow him to finish to make his point.
The correct position would have been, one, national government stops doing devolved functions. Correct. Once that happens, we are going to free up more money to the counties and everyone will be happy.
So then what is the bone of contention?
Of course, the problem is one. The problem was members of the National Assembly have been holding brief for the executive.
No, we don't.
Continuing to come up with positions which appear to say Kenya is still one entity that is not devolved.
That's why I started by asking, is it a deliberate effort to stifle devolution?
Yeah, it is, for me, from where I sit.
You see, case the problem which you can identify. When we sit on division of revenue, by the way, our position in the National Assembly is that the Senate has no role there. That's
another major issue.
Yes, the Supreme Court, which was searching for space, previously, having been made a new institution of governance, to us misinterpreted the Constitution and therefore divested a function, vested in the National Assembly to the Senate. But we don't care much about that. We are saying if they want a proper interpretation, let them go to the High Court. And of course, when you go in the context of an advisory opinion, Akisa, an advice is an advice. Like I'm telling you, we are not going to join that Supreme Court thing. We don't need advice. To us, the law is clear in terms of what we need to do. What we want the senators to do is to tell us and tell the nation, what is the basis upon which you are increasing such increment? And you see, Kangata is getting it. But that is not what they are saying when they go to negotiate for counties a division of revenue. And I can tell you, if we were to approach it in the manner now he says, then they would be seeking beyond 17 billion. The counties would be getting over 700 billion. Because I'm one person who stands with the position that devolved functions are very critical functions. They are those very functions which are closest to human life. You know, you are dealing with water, you are dealing with health, you are dealing with county roads, you are dealing with agriculture. That is food. You know what I mean? Why can't the Senate, sit down and identify this money is going to agriculture wrongly? Help us, as our colleagues in the National Assembly come from those counties, to send it, instead of coming with an arbitrary figure like ADA, 17 billion. So that the failing has been a failing on the part of the Senate when claiming money for counties, to tie these monies to particular functions.
That's why I would ask,
that is where the problem is.
That's why I would ask, like most Kenyans are asking, why have we failed to agree as the National Assembly and the Senate, and for, of course, the Senate to move to court? Does it mean we failed to take advantage of all the avenues of dispute resolution?
Yes, can I mention that? We went to court for several reasons, which include there are several pieces of legislation that have been signed into law without reference to Senate, notwithstanding they touch on matters that have been devolved. Let me give you several examples. Number one, we have the Tax Law Amendment of 2018. It proposed to amend what we call the Stamp Duty Act and to remove stamp duty from first-time homeowners. The idea is to give incentives for first-time homeowners to buy homes. But then again, housing is a devolved function. So for us, we feel that law ought to have been referred to the Senate. Number two, we have several what we call statute miscellaneous. Statute miscellaneous amendment bills. There were two, 2017 and 2018. Again, when you look at that, what we call the omnibus legislation, it had several issues that touched on devolved function. For instance, amending, let's say, for instance, the Housing Act. Again, housing is something that is devolved. We also had an issue with the Health Laws Amendment Bill of 2018. We all know health is devolved. Again, there was no reference to Senate. We had an issue, for instance, with the NYS bill, which was, touching on matters of NYS. We all know NYS deals with matters that have been devolved.
Is, why did
so
we discuss
the point is, 15 pieces of legislation, which almost all of them, in fact not all of them touch on matters that have been devolved under Schedule 4 of the Constitution. They were passed, discussed by the National Assembly, signed into law without reference to
There have been some arguments.
Article 110. Article 110.
Yes.
Article 110.
Yes.
Sub-Article 3 and also Sub-Article 4 sets out procedure of concurrence between Speaker of the National Assembly and the Speaker of the Senate. That procedure was not adhered to, and therefore, from where we sit, all those pieces of legislations are unconstitutional.
Is this then an indictment to both speakers of the National Assembly and the Senate?
No, of course no. Otherwise, the Senate will not be going to court. Because we are going to court basically because we are complaining to say...
There's been an argument, gentlemen, there's been an argument from some quarters that, of course from members of parliament, that those particular bills in question do not necessarily touch directly on counties. That's what they've said. But who decides which bill generally really affects the counties for concurrence to be sought? That's why I'm asking, is it an indictment for both speakers?
I agree with you. This is the context of Article 110, which my brother is quoting.
On procedure?
That before a bill is placed on either house, the speakers would have met.
Yes.
They would have consulted and come to an agreement whether it is touching the county, in which case it should also be transacted in the Senate. Or it is a pure, national government function, in which case it is our business. Now, when a bill is placed before Parliament, our presumption as members of Parliament is that those initial processes have been gone through. But we never shut our heads. We will still look at the law and question whether there is anything in the bill that touches, on our county. The problem with the Senate has been a tendency to overstretch their mandate. There is a reason as to why the Constitution said the National Assembly will enact all laws. Okay? The Senate will participate in lawmaking functions concerning those legislations affecting the county. The Senate is proceeding as if all these functions are exclusively theirs. Look at the health bill, for instance. I was there when it was being, transacted. And I'm one person who is very acutely aware of, devolution is, being a party in a party that supports it. The national referral facilities are not devolved. Matters policies, so long as they don't, affect implementation at the county, is not involved. What business, for instance, therefore, has National Assembly to refer a bill restricted to national referral facilities to the Senate? But you see, the senators are arguing. To them, once you mention health, it does not matter that it is not the devolved part of health you are treating. You have necessarily to refer it to them. And that is the challenge we have. We have a new house in our structure of parliament that we have today, which is not keeping to the mandate. They believe anything touching on any Kenyan, despite the constitutional, provision that we represent the people, they represent the county as entities. So long as it is health, it is affecting Kenyans, county as people, you have to... Then there was no reason to designate these roles. My request would be that they have done the right thing. They have gone to court. My problem is the court they have gone to. I imagine they have gone to the High Court. For the Division of Revenue, as I've said, we are done, we are not going back to it, it is a law.
This is what they've continuously called, yes, the grandstanding that is ensuring the stalemate does not work out.
The governors want more money. We've given them what is there. The Constitution says the National Assembly enacts. We have enacted. So that I want to request the media, not only KTN, but the entire media, that don't talk about a bill. We have passed a bill. We have even appropriated. If there is a challenge with it, its constitutionality and other things, that is now for court. And as I've told you on Division of Revenue, we are not, proceeding to the Supreme Court because we don't need advice. We know, we understood well what we were doing and what the Constitution says. If they have a challenge with it, and I think on this, Kangata will agree with me, like these bills, take them to the High Court, let the High Court consider their constitutionality and nullify them or not. Well, when they are nullified, and I want to tell you, Division of Revenue, Akisa, is a very serious bill. When you nullify Division of Revenue, you collapse government, including the judiciary. I want to see how they are going to do it. But it is not the way to go. Because again, when you collapse it, we have 6 months period, Kangata will tell you, to generate a new one.
Senator Kangata,
we have no problem.
With the MPs saying they will not be taking part at the Supreme Court, where then does this leave the Senate? How do we proceed?
Yes, for me, it is a portrayal of some form of just dumping on the part of the National Assembly.
And grandstanding from what
well, for me, it is a classic example of an entity that does not respect the rule of law, that does not respect any other institutions as created by the Constitution, because surely they are calling a High Court finding an advice which can be accepted or rejected. That is erroneous. They are saying they are not going to enter appearance in a matter that is going to be filed in the High Court. No, again, that is another classic example.
The one for the governors.
You hear
if you go to the High Court, we have no problem. You need advice. We need a court interpretation.
You hear? Yeah. To me, this is an example of people who are being, and how do I say, drunk with power? People who are not respecters of the rule of law. Because if they were, they would come to court, explain themselves, show constitutionality of those bills, show whatever they did was above board. But for me, that is being unfair to Kenyans, being contemptuous of the court process. And for us, I strongly believe we shall prevail so that we are able to show we were correct ab initio.
All right. I'll just take a quick break as we wrap it up for our viewers on KTN Home. We continue with this conversation around the stalemate and issues surrounding why the Senate and the National Assembly have failed to agree on a number of issues. When we get back, of course, we'll be taking a look at what happens now. Honorable Kaluma says they're not interested in going to court and explaining themselves. So then where does this leave this conversation? Thank you for joining us. For our viewers on KTN Home, we continue this discussion. You can join us on KTN News. My name is Akisa Wandera. I'll see you in a bit.